we are looking at assessment of culturally and linguistically diverse students at Whitehorse High School in Montezuma Creek, Utah, which is actually a middle and high school. It takes approximately 3 hours per lesson across 5 planning periods. This does not include time creating explicit instruction artworks. The 3 hours is specific to building each lesson in Google Slides and Nearpod. The Google Slides are first built and then transferred into Nearpod and then transferred into Canvas. I'm sharing lessons from my middle school Art Foundations 1 and 9th grade 3D design classes. The examples I'm providing in this video are specific to explicit instruction and assessment. So you can see there are links to the 4 lesson plans if you wish to look more deeply into each lesson. At the beginning of this year, we did switch to an 80 block schedule, plus returning to in-person teaching after over a year of virtual learning. At the beginning of the year, I was writing very formal lesson plans, plus doing all of the above, which was resulting in 90 additional hours per month of planning time. And so, working with my principal, we found a better way to be able to structure the lessons and not bury me in the process, but there is an example provided of a more formal lesson plan if wanted. So, we start with I call Do Now's Creative Sparks because, after all, we are in Raider Studio, we are in the art room, and so we look at how it's going to tie to today's learning, which cannot even be about preparing materials. So, for example, you might see in the Anthropomorphic Me project where they were looking into identifying 6 key characteristics about an animal. In another Do Now, they are checking their progress against their rubric. Their rubrics include checkboxes so that they can be certain to see if they're completing all of the requirements. Or it might be a writing frame that they're working on in preparation for an assignment. I always lead with essential questions. I just feel the essential questions start building a framework for the learning, and I will often capitalize key terms, helping them just focus in on some of those key vocabulary words that are part of the content learning. So, for example, an essential question would be, we're working on adding clay to our figure, and so, how do I use that clay to start creating some of the characteristics? Or how do I use my rubric and to use the colors necessary in a positive, negative design artwork? Or they might be, the broader project, how do I create a self-portrait as a puppet, a life drawing, or a fence art? So it's starting to preload that learning. Scholars will either individually or in groups share the lesson's learning objectives. Then there's a variety of engagement techniques that are used to unpack the objectives, such as questions being embedded, or maybe they're doing a think, pair, share, or a draw it, or a collaborate board that's right inside of Nearpod, or I'll also use Jamboard. I also work on reframing visual art standards into more scholar-friendly language. So you can see an example of a typical middle school visual arts course standard being rewritten into, this is really what we're doing. I can use these elements of art, space, shape, and color to create a second artwork. And so that's the idea of helping bring the standards into more scholar-friendly language. And so again, you can see examples of this in the learning objectives. And again, questions that are embedded, where are we on our rubric, for example. Cold calling on the scholars, as far as individually or choral reads of the learning objectives before we unpack them. And so again, you can see how these are tied in, you know, that the do nows too are leading right into those objectives for the day. Content area vocabulary is also identified, and the assessment of vocabulary happens in a variety of ways, which when I'm preparing them for a quiz, for example, I'll do like timed matching pairs. I'll put them into inside-outside circles for them to help each other prepare and review the vocabulary. But really the most important application of the vocabulary is in how they are applying it in the construction of their artworks. So not only when the vocabulary is introduced, but we often do reviews. We ask questions about the vocabulary, get them thinking more deeply about it, and again, how is it going to apply to the work that they'll be creating. Even bringing in the idea of what is a rubric and how do we use a rubric, and using simple nonverbal cues, if you know, a thumbs up, thumbs down, if they can explain, you know, what they need to do for a project. I also find that progress trackers and rubrics and scholar-built rubrics especially are helping them self-assess as they're moving through the learning process. The progress trackers really help a scholar see the entirety of the learning and where they are in the learning. And I also find the progress trackers are really useful in helping scholars build their own rubrics. And so this is an example of what a rubric will look like. And again, you can see the check boxes so that they can really be looking and self-assessing, you know, am I really including all of these things, and what happens if I don't include all of these things in my project. Again, this is just another example, you know, of a rubric being used in one of the projects being focused upon. And then this, you can see where a progress tracker is put together. So we build these progress trackers together. So again, step by step, the scholars identify what is it that I need to get done, and then they also see steps in the explicit instruction process that I provide for them, you know, that I photograph the pieces I work on while they're in process so they can see where I am on it as well. Again, a variety of verbal and nonverbal informal assessments. Check for understanding throughout the lesson, whether it's a fist of 5, thumbs up, thumbs down, a stoplight. All these methods help me understand where scholars are in the learning process, and specifically which scholars I need to give additional attention to. We always post the success criteria so they know where they're heading, and even again for them to use these nonverbal techniques to identify and assess where they are in their learning. Finally, I create a lot of explicit instruction artwork that the scholars see so they have good examples in front of them, good visuals for them to understand what a successful project looks like. And these examples are loaded into Canvas. I have my own portfolio. They all build digital art portfolios, and I have my own art portfolio that I put up as an example for them all the time, you know, so they can see it. And my examples are posted in Canvas, so they have a good example to look at. So again, you can see these are different types of rubrics, assessments, explicit instruction pieces that are posted into Canvas for them to see. So with 70% of White Horse Scholars being identified as ELL and 25% on IEPs, these CDL strategies are really best for all of our scholars.